have a little bit of a different setup today. Instead of our normal podcast where we present about some topic related to art or something like that, we got we struck a chord last episode with our uh, Barbie podcast. It wasn't even really about Barbie; it was about what is art. But people focused in so much about what we had to say about Barbie that we figured it might be good to do a little podcast where we respond to some of the comments, go through as many as we can, not just the ones about Barbie, but all of the ones about this from that came from this episode, this What is Art episode.
Hmm.
We're going live right now, but if you're getting this after our live stream, I'll put in a link to in the description to that podcast so you know what we're talking about. But a lot of these explanations will be self-explanatory. I hope you all enjoy this. Some of these comments are kind of fun. So shall we dive in, Pete?
Yeah, let's do it. And we're doing this live, so it's
Right,
gonna be a wild
right.
ride.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I realized that some of the answers, when we're prepping for the Socrati, which, by the way, pre-order after we go live. After we're done with the live stream, I'll put in a link in the description to pre-order the Socrati. When you're prepping for a feature film, plus you have sick kids, and Peter's a DC correspondent journalist, we just couldn't devote enough time to actually answer a lot of these comments as they should. Sometimes it's just a 2-minute answer is all we can give. So this allows us to go in a little bit, devote a little bit more thought, which we haven't done up till now. So enjoy our off the cuff comments.
Yeah.
Okay, first comment, not about Barbie. In regard to the strikes, writers and actors, is that going to slow production? Or are you all seeking an exemption as independent producers? So, again, that's about our upcoming feature film, The Socrati. It is not slowing down production at all. Actually, since that comment was posted, we had our first actress. We're doing a table read in a week or so. We'll live stream some of that stuff as well about that table read. We're really excited about that. So we're doing our first table read, and this is pre-casting. We're kind of getting a sense of how the script is connecting with some of our audience here in Houston. Um, and one of the actresses expressed some concern about doing a table read, despite the fact that there's a SAG-AFTRA strike. This is going to be a non-union production, um, so we don't have to worry about that. We do have a desire to work with union actors if that's the right person for the role, um, which means that we would have trouble if we were going to go to production and we need to set up a contract with that union actor. Right now, we're not at that stage. We're not at the casting stage. This could only become an issue should we want to cast someone as a union actor who is a union actor when we go into production, which we're targeting Q1 of 2024. So not a huge concern right now, um, but something to watch out for. It could become necessary for us to have to look for an exemption. I doubt it. I don't think that we're going to get to a point where that'll be a concern. Any thoughts for you, Pete?
Well, I'm just wondering, how long do you think this is gonna last? Do you think it's gonna continue on all the way to Q1 of 2024, or do you think this is gonna be ending soon?
I think it's a possibility it could. I think it's a real possibility that it could. I'm wondering. I'm not so concerned about production because filmmakers produce. That's what we do. It's if we're not in a point where we're beholden upon some large union to make stuff happen.
Hmm.
I'm more wondering. I'm wondering if it lasts long enough. I don't know if it will. I think it could last long enough where theater chains, distributors start to feel the effects of not having these big budget productions anymore. That could really, really affect companies like AMC that are already teetering on the brink of bankruptcy.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm curious to see if this might actually have a trickle down effect that really disrupts distribution and the industry at large more than we've seen of late. Um,
Hmm.
because if AMC goes down, that's the largest theater chain in the US. So that's going to have a huge effect. Um, and I know with something our listeners have heard me say before, whenever there is something like that has that disruption, there's a vacuum, which gives us, an ability to be able to do more. Whenever there's
Hmm.
a vacuum and power disruption, then there's people that have to rise to fill that vacuum. So I'm curious to see how innovative filmmakers are able to use disruption in services to be able to get their work out there. I'm curious to see how that works. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's kind of similar to what we've discussed with the whole idea of Hollywood and LA kind of being the mecca of filmmakers. It's a more 2020 showed us that we can have a more um, democratized type of filmmaking and a more less uncentralized type of filmmaking. And so I think that's a really great idea. I mean, you know I think that it's very obvious that movie theaters are really reeling right now. That's why movies like, from a filmmaker's perspective, I think movies like the success of Barbie and the success of Oppenheimer have been really huge for the industry, because it's kind of showing how people still do like going to movie theaters and enjoying a movie out in the theaters, because we're seeing theaters close across the country. And so um, the fact that there's all of these strikes and everything right now, I think that definitely could open up more avenues and more doors for filmmakers like you and me, who just want to tell stories and work and
Right.
put out a movie,
That's
regardless
right.
of all the craziness going on.
That's right. I think filmmakers will always find a way to tell stories. Storytellers will find a way to tell stories. So let's see how that shakes out. Okay, moving on. Here's a good comment. As Catholics, we believe in objective truth. So that's something we said in the podcast. So this commenter Rick put Rick Adsley 2 put it in quotation marks. As Catholics, we believe in objective truth, and then outside of quotation marks, if only. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, so I can ask, what do you mean? He actually replied to that. If Catholics believe in objective truth, they wouldn't be Catholic. Although anyone is more than capable of believing in objective truth. You just don't currently. So, Rick, we do agree with that. I think there's three points there. The first one is that Catholics don't believe in objective truth. And if they did, they wouldn't be Catholic. The second part is anyone is capable of believing objective truth. And the third part is that we don't currently believe in objective truth. So I believe with this, I agree with you on the second one. I think anyone is capable of believing in objective truth. That is something that later commenters do not agree with. We can get to those comments later. Although I am a little confused about, and there was no clarity afterward. I asked for a little bit more clarity. What specifically about Catholics was he honing in on that made him say Catholics can't believe in objective truth? I wasn't sure about that. Um, what do you make of that, though, Peter? Have you heard that? Is there anything particular you've heard about?
Well, as far as major controversies going on right now, I don't know. It's difficult to say because we don't really know what perspective he's coming from. I mean, this could mean any number of things. Like, maybe, I don't know. This could be coming from a Protestant perspective. Like all those papists, or it could, maybe it's a science. I believe in science perspective. I'm not sure. Um, but obviously, this is an accusation that has been levied against Catholics for thousands of years, and the fact that um, millions of people have found this to be the truth, despite those accusations for thousands of years, I think is a good testament that we actually have something right here, something that does make sense and that is objectively true. Um, because there are a lot of, I think there's a huge variation in this church that has millions of people in it. It's a huge variation in intellects and IQs. And something wonderful about the church is that it has a wellspring of thousands of years of knowledge, um, not to mention divine revelation, that really helps give you a jump start. And so, um, I'm not. It's really hard to respond to such a blanket statement,
Yeah.
as objective truth. I mean, what you know, we believe I don't know what he's really saying here. I think I'll have to talk to him a little bit more. Which I'd love for him, to respond to that our comments again, because I really want to hear what he took issue with.
Yeah. Yeah, it struck me as a little bit of an Obi-Wan Kenobi. Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Yeah,
Old Darth Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Darth.
Okay. Moving on. Another great comment. As far as lives being art, so something we had said in the previous podcast, we were wondering if a life could be a work of art. For example, a life of a saint could be a work of art. And a comment here saying, as far as lives being art, I remember Malcolm Muggeridge's book on Mother Teresa, Something Beautiful for God. Her life was an artistic beauty. Her life was a work of art. So this is kind of something going along what you had said, Peter, where you thought that our definition of art could include someone's life, possibly. Um,
Mhm.
do you think that, let's going back to how we define art, do you think that Mother Teresa's life is an example of a work of art? Because I remember I challenged you to say, hey, come up with an example, and you didn't say Mother Teresa, but our commenter here did. What do you make of that?
Um, I don't think I really know enough about Mother Teresa. I know about Mother Teresa in the sense that I'm a Catholic, and then also I'm a person that lives in the 21st century. So I know that about Mother Teresa, but I don't know, exactly a lot of her, um, how she lived her life with intention. I know that she lived it in pursuit of God and in passionate love of God. Um, but I think that we said in our definition of art that you have to have the intention of creating art, right? Wasn't that part of it? And so,
It's something done with
um,
intentionality.
right. And so I think, um, the idea that your life can be a work of art, it has to still have the intention that you're attempting to portray art. And so, when it comes down to it, I think we said that while some saints, I think there are some saints whose lives could be considered works of art. It doesn't fit within the definition unless they actually intended to make that art. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you would have to kind of leave out the intentionality for art and have to be maybe the intentionality, like broaden it to intentionality for beauty, like
Hmm.
pursuing beauty as a whole. Because, and then of course you'd have to define beauty if you did that. Beauty can be, I think, a much broader umbrella than art. Art kind of, I think, art lives underneath the beauty umbrella, at least the way that we were defining art. Um,
Hmm. You know,
so
some
go ahead.
someone who makes me think again. I don't know if he would exactly fit into our definition, but to me, it seems like Saint Jose Maria Escriva would be someone who is much more, well, I don't know if he's more close than Saint Mother Teresa, but to me, he's very close to this idea and this definition of art because he had very much a philosophy that was grounded in or rooted in, making your life a prayer and a work for God. So I think that definitely is very close, at least, to fitting within our definition of art because his idea is about crafting a life that is, um, something beautiful for God, and that goes down to how you wake up in the morning and how you, um, do your daily task and work at your job. And so I think that his philosophy is very close to what I was kind of getting at about making your life a work of art.
I can see that. As somebody else that I think of when I try and make an example like this, which again, I'm not convinced that even a life of a saint would qualify as a work of art, would be Saints Louis and Zélie Martin. So the parents of the doctor of the church, Saint Therese of Lisieux. Um, I do think that I've always thought that there's something really romantic, something super artistic about the lives of these two saints that were pretty much just lived in obscurity. And then the mom dies early, and then every single one of their children goes off to the convent. They're all girls. So every single one of their girls goes off to the convent. And then the father dies alone. Well, he had one of his daughters there with him, but he had to give up all his daughters. Um, which is and he had serious mental terrors at the end of his life. So it was definitely something that was incredibly beautiful, incredibly sad in times. Um, and I've always struck me as something that's incredibly artistic, but I don't see it consciously being a work of art. And of course, that's what inspired their parenthood is what inspired, along with the Holy Spirit, um, the Little Way of Saint Therese, which has completely changed our modern practice of religion, which influenced greatly Saint Josemaria Escrivá, which you just spoke about right now. I mean, he really is the spiritual child of Saint Therese of Lisieux. So that's a great. I like that example. Still not 100% convinced. I do know I have read Mother Teresa's "Come Be My Light," going back to the original comment we spoke of.
Mhm.
That was incredibly beautiful. It was all about Mother Teresa feeling a separation from God, where at first she was like married with God completely, just right there. And then there was a spiritual darkness that lasted the whole rest of her life. And it's all about her calling out to her lover, saying, "Hey, where are you? How can I find you?" Um, and not hearing a response, but continuing on despite it, knowing that he's there and trusting that he's there.
Mhm.
Um, and it's heartbreaking, but it's also incredibly beautiful. Um, but it's not something that I never once read that she was consciously thinking about making this a work of art. And I think that conscious thought is a big part of our definition.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, that being said, these are ideas that are intrinsically tied together because, as we said, art, part of that definition of art is the pursuit of beauty and pursuit of truth. Um, and
Which
so,
our Barbie bro will be disagreeing with you very soon in the comment section. Go ahead. Yes, keep going.
yeah. Um, but and so I think it's very much tied in, even if it's not exactly, fits within the definition of a life, work of art. Um, the lives of the saints are examples that, they are portrayed in art because their lives are beautiful. You know, we look to them as examples of how we would like to emulate, of examples we'd like to emulate because their lives are beautiful. And in that way, in that sense, it's a pretty artistic life. Um, but even so, I'm saying, yeah, even if it's not exactly fitting in, I think that these ideas are very intrinsically tied together, at least in my mind.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay. Moving forward. Love the addition of harmony in the definition of art. It's great to see the Pinedo sister as well. Great comment. Thank you. Yeah, I think the addition of harmony was crucial. That's something we added. So one of the tenets we had of art was that it had a form that was recognizable. And then Annie, our sister, jumped in that it should have a harmonic form, something that created harmony with it, which we all loved, which is good. Moving on. The Worn In says, if you stop trying to define everything, I think you'd find it much easier to have a real conversation. Having preferences is fine, very normal, of course, yet the restriction you've imposed to create your definition of art has led you to contradict yourself in real time as you realize these conventions, forms, strictures, etc., used in art to convey a whole work are tools which work together. Remember, you can't have harmony without disharmony. Okay, the last part is interesting because why? Why can't you have harmony without disharmony? That follows no rule of music that I'm familiar with. Um, is there maybe some sort of larger picture that or large? Are you trying to reference something that's not that's outside of music? And if so, where does that happen? Like for example, if I live in a family and so does it mean we have to fight all the time in order to love each other? Is that kind of what you're trying to say? Which I reject that one as well. I've heard that argument how good
You know,
couples. Go ahead.
yeah, I would. I think did he respond anymore to our
No.
comment? Okay, now I would want to ask him exactly what he means by that because that is very confusing and at surface value at least it does seem that he's contradicting himself in real time, which is what you said we were doing. But I I'm um because I mean obviously those are contradictory terms, harmony and disharmony. Although I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say perhaps what he means by that is the idea that in order to have harmony, there must be differences, because if there's different notes that make a harmony, you can't have one note make a harmony. So maybe what he's kind of saying is that they're not everything can have be of one mind or of one train of thought, or like in a family, right? Obviously not everyone is at the same mind. There's
Right.
differences, different people, different differences of opinion that come together to make the harmony. So that maybe that's what he's trying to say, giving him the benefit of the doubt, because otherwise that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Great point. Thank you for pointing out that in telling us we were contradicting ourselves, he contradicted himself, or she. The worn in is the username. Unfortunately, I asked for clarification, and there never was any more clarification. I do think, um, I do think if you wish to have a conversation in which you're putting forth something that could be complicated, it's important to define the terms that you're using. So I
Mhm.
also disagree with his or her um, preference to not have definitions. It seems like you're not going to be able to communicate with everyone, and no one can agree with anything if you don't define the words you're using and how you're using them. So
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that kind of shows our preference for getting definitions, because I just asked for him to define what he meant by disharmony when he's complaining about us asking for definitions. But that's kind of the world that we live in. I think we have you go out into the street, and it's difficult oftentimes to have conversations with people because our basic definitions of common words are not the same. I mean, I think there's countless examples you can think of people having conversations that just are they're completely talking past each other, and without consciously meaning to, just because they don't have any concept of what the other person is trying to tell them, because they're almost speaking different languages. So I think that's definitely a real problem in today's society, and so that's why I think defining terms, making sure that you agree on what you're talking about, is something that's pretty important.
absolutely. I mean, think about it. If you're running a company and one person has a different definition of this is a high level problem than the other person has this is a high level problem, which I've heard different definitions of this term, you're never going to get anything done because one person is thinking that means one thing, another person is thinking that means something else. The problem never gets solved. So
Mhm.
defining terms is crucial to actually accomplishing anything. Sorry,
Mhm.
hard. No, the worn in. Okay, moving on. Um, that other guy says it is important to have. He's quoting us. This is another quotation guy. It is important to have some conception or idea of what you're consuming because oftentimes what you end up consuming as art is not really art at all, but propaganda. Hard disagree, says the other guy. So that he quoted us and then he, without a quote, hard disagree. For one, propaganda is absolutely art. Something is okay. So he just kind of says that over and over, it looks like. Um, okay. Um, I guess the question I would have is why? I know I replied to this. It looks like he didn't reply to that. That's too bad. Um, why why do we say that propaganda is art? A great deal of historical creations would consider art are absolutely propagandistic, glorifying some state or religion. Okay. So that's something that's interesting. And something I pointed out was that we were talking in that last podcast about the the Monuments Men movie, which kind of the inciting incident that led George Clooney, it was a George Clooney film, that led George Clooney on his quest was that one of his men was shot trying to protect a statue of Madonna and Child. So, a very Catholic piece of art. And they said very clearly the guy wasn't Catholic. Um, and the whole rest of the movie, George Clooney, so he gets shot. The Nazis take the statue because they're stealing art from everywhere. And in the whole rest of the movie, George Clooney's trying to find the statue. And it's really kind of the central piece of or the central artifact of that film. But it had nothing to do with the message of the film, which is, or the message of the piece, the work of art. Which, if you were going to boil down the message that as it was originally construed to be, it would have been have reverence for Mary, the Mother of God. I think that is pretty safe to say that when they commissioned that artwork, that's what the message they wanted. the artist didn't rely upon that being the only thing in his artwork. He did so many other different things, and his art took that message and then encompassed so many different other things: beauty, motherhood, um, just care. Like just there's so much care that's written into the mother caring for the child, and vulnerability, all these different things. I think if you had just had that message, there's no way that George Clooney could make a film about something that just encompassed that message. And that's what was our definition of propaganda, which is if you make something which relies completely on the message, such that if you take it away, you don't have anything left anymore, then you have propaganda.
Mm.
So it doesn't follow at all to say that propaganda is absolutely art. If that's our definition of propaganda, maybe his definition of propaganda, he never actually defined propaganda. He says most people use the term propaganda to describe anything with a message they disagree with, but he doesn't say what he defines it. I don't think, maybe if that's his definition as well, or that other guy's definition as well, that could um, that could be there could be some shred of truth to it if that's your definition. But I don't think that's plays as a definition, because you could disagree with anything and everything, and so then everything becomes propaganda. Like I could disagree with every film that's out there for one reason or another. Like, no, this film is not right, or this is not true, or whatever it is. That's a completely disagreement is not an objective thing. Disagreement is a subjective state that people have to try to align their ideas with each other. So if you're going to define something uh, that's subjective and then apply it to every single piece of work that's out there, well, you're going to kind of just destroy any ability to argue about anything. Does that make sense? What do you make of all that?
Well, I'm kind of just wondering if he thinks that all art is propaganda, then. Is that what he's saying in your
No,
mind?
he says propaganda is absolutely art, but he doesn't say that all art is propaganda.
I mean, it seems like that's what he's saying,
It says that just about every piece of art could be propagandistic to someone. So, like, maybe it's an argument that everything is subjective, which is something that we disagreed with completely. I Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, we've had multiple whole podcasts kind of devoted to this topic. Um, and I think I really agree with you when you're talking about the idea of the statue and the monuments men. Um, it's it yes, it's a religious statue, but also I think that that its portrayal of a religious figure is it speaks to truths that are universal, kind of like you were talking about. They was talking about the idea of motherhood and of I haven't seen the movie, so I can't exactly speak on the statue exactly, but from what you were telling me, that those are universal truths that you don't have to be Catholic to understand and relate to, and hold up, because I think those are inherently good for humanity. Those are ideas that are inherently good. And we'll get to that in a little while when we're talking about Barbie, but those are ideas that are obviously being attacked at the moment in our place in society. Um, I think this, to me, this argument kind of falls into a good number of uh, whole problems and holes. One of them is that it is indicative. I think the piece of truth that it does show is that it is indicative of our society in which everyone likes to scream at each other. you know, in the moment that you disagree with something, you scream that it's propaganda. Um, so that's true. It's not something that we should be doing. Um, but obviously, that's not what we were doing in the podcast. Um, we're just drawing a hard line between what is simply a message that's being pushed down your throat, and something that is actually beautiful and worthy of viewing and appreciating. I think that anyone who looks at anyone who compares and contrasts, let's say like um, a government poster for recruitment, let's say, and then looks at a work by you know Raphael or someone like that, you can tell the difference. You don't need anyone to tell you which one is art and which one's propaganda. You see them very clearly and very obviously. So I think that we're talking about objective truth here, and that is probably a problem if you don't believe in that.
Mhm. Mhm. Agreed. Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to um, have an argument unless you have, like, you can't have higher, more difficult and uh, nuanced argument about a point until you've agreed upon more basic points. And I think the basic point that we have here, our basic disagreement, is about objective truth. If I remember
Mhm.
correctly, the same commenter said that he doesn't. Beauty is subjective, so that's something that he also said. Um, what points about fantasy? So I don't think I get the sense that there is no agreement on objective truth at all. Beauty is subjective, propaganda is subjective, art is subjective. Um, so if we were to get to the heart of it, the idea is there such a thing as objective truth? And I actually really like the other guy's comments. They're really in detail, which is more detail than we have the time to go through. Um, but if we're going to get to the heart of it, objective truth, let's try and steel man his argument. So objective truth is impossible to reach because everyone's going to disagree on it. Objective truth is and then if something is impossible to agree upon, then does it really exist, practically speaking? If it's something that doesn't exist in our world, then does it exist in theoretical world either? Does that seem to be a good argument to you?
Um, so say that again. It's the idea that if it doesn't exist, if we're not able to agree on it, then it's not real.
Right. If there's something that I'm just trying to steel man. So he doesn't make the argument, I don't think, in all of these comments. And I apologize that other guy if I've missed it somewhere. Um, he doesn't make the argument that objective truth is doesn't exist. However, I think the underlying through all the different comments that I have read are objective truth doesn't exist.
Hmm.
So we're steel manning that argument, saying, well, it's impossible for everyone to agree upon everything. And if everyone can't agree upon everything, then there's no such a thing as objective truth because in practicality it doesn't exist.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would, the reason I would disagree with that is that it seems to me that there are at least a very baseline of things that we are forced to agree on, you know? So there are things that all of us agree on, whether we like it or not. And that is, obviously there's the physical uh, realities that if I step outside, my ledge, I'm going to fall and either die or break something, you know? So there's that, at least the very physical baseline of understanding the physical world that we live in right now. And of course, there are core ideas that we believe in and that are also being challenged in that regard as well right now. Um, but even, excluding those, there is a baseline still, and there will always have to be a baseline in order for any type of society to exist. If everyone stopped believing in that common baseline right now, like society would collapse by the end of the night. Um, and so I think that these these things that there's an objective truth and objective reality in that, and part of the evidence for that is that we have so many people who would hate to admit that they agree with each other, but we all do when it comes to that.
Right. Well, Chesterton talks about this quite a bit with his whole danger of suicide of thought, where if you no longer believe, you no longer hold to the ideal that there is something that's out there that we can all agree upon because it's objectively true. And if someone doesn't agree on it, then they're wrong, like categorically wrong. And if someone does agree with it, then they're right. If you don't hold into that sort of thing, to that sort of ideal, then you no longer can really think. It's the suicide of thought. Because what's the point in actually analyzing and arguing and talking about things
Mm-hmm.
if there's no right answer to them?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a problem that we have with Scorsese now, with the art that he has, where he's so fixated in asking questions, at least in his more recent work, that it's almost like you're in love with the sound of your own voice, and you no
Mm-hmm.
longer really have the ability to listen and then be able to take action based upon what you've heard.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that Chesterton was having is that we need to be a very action-oriented people, where we can say, okay, we agree, and let's move on. There's like the flag of the world sort of idea that he talks about. Um, so if you want to go down the rabbit hole of that it's all relative, you see all the problems that this modern society has created: the nihilism, the suicide ideation, um, the mass shooters. All of these sort of um, all of these terrible maladies that we're experiencing now. Chesterton talked about way back when. Dostoevsky talked about way back when they saw all of this happening, and they rejected it categorically. That there are properly basic beliefs that we can argue and agree upon. And
Mm-hmm.
since there are properly, if we can just plant our flag on that, then we can think and we can communicate together, and we can go somewhere together.
Mm-hmm.
So if 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 we can agree upon that, then it's all we're arguing about what those basic beliefs should be, and then we're building upon those together once we've agreed upon those properly basic beliefs. So the argument for relative thought, that everything is relative, ultimately destroys thought. It's a thought that destroys thinking. It's a really great point that Chesterton points out. So I would reject it categorically just because someone, and so trying to address the Steelman argument itself, just because ideas and thoughts and principles are difficult to discern and difficult to agree upon, doesn't mean that they shouldn't be agreed upon. Just because something is difficult doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And I can agree very much so that we're going to disagree quite a bit on what is objective and what is objectively true. However, that doesn't mean that because we disagree upon it, it's subjective. I think the two don't follow. So I think that's the underlying argument that gets at a lot of these things. And this is let's do about the Barbie comment, because there's a lot of Barbie comments, um, and I want to make sure. So the other guy says, I'll admit I haven't seen the Barbie movie myself, but I'm familiar with the plot. It, is it possible you derived an unintended conclusion from the film or misunderstood its themes? It's possible we misunderstood. Maybe it's ineffective in its messaging, or perhaps it left its target demographic. You're wholly uncharitable to the creators of the film in a way that doesn't make sense to me. Say that your interpretation was the intended one. Why exactly would they want to push that message? So our interpretation was: are you trying to teach women to hate men? Why? Are you trying to teach people to do things that are destructive to themselves because you're miserable? So pointing out that basically the point that we're making is that the messages of this film are destructive. to the young women that are watching it. That's something that Annie pointed out, or something that Annie spoke to really well. I really appreciated it. Um, so say that your interpretation was the intended one, back to his comment. Why exactly would they want to push that message? Because you assume they're miserable and they just want to cause trouble? What good would that do for them or anyone? Consider that people with different vantage points are most likely people like you that want to improve the world. Businesses are self-centered. Even a business wouldn't benefit from a message like that. Okay, there's a lot there. I like that a lot. That's a good assumption to start out with, that people are people. Um, However, it is also a naive assumption to attribute that at all times when you see something that is destructive. You can't just say, oh, well, this is a destructive message. So therefore, but I'm going to assume that they didn't mean this destructive message. So therefore, let's give them a pass. I think you still need to look critically at art, or that which purports to be art, to see if the messages are potentially not good messages, especially if you're a parent, especially if you have kids that are growing up in this world. um, that's something that's very front of mind. So are we being wholly uncharitable to the creators of the film? I don't think so. We're just talking about the messages that we're seeing in the film. So I don't think that I don't think just because you just because we see something that is, or just because we want to give people the benefit of the doubt that they are people, which actually isn't the benefit of the doubt, is true, they are people, it doesn't mean that we can no longer be critical. Okay, regarding the themes of the film, you have to understand that anti-patriarchy doesn't mean anti-men. So this goes on for quite a while. Men are just as much victims of the patriarchal expectations. He goes on quite a bit. Gendered roles aren't useful in a modern society where nobody has to chuck spears. Um, can you specify what things you saw that were destructive um, in this film?
Mhm.
Why don't you take that, Pete? I think that you
Well,
respond pretty viscerally to that one.
yeah, no. So, unfortunately, I have seen the movie, um, and so I when we last spoke, um, I really tried. I don't think that I said anything negative towards it. I don't recall that. But I was trying to reserve judgment as much as I could because I know the message that is being portrayed culturally from the movie, but I hadn't seen the movie yet. Um, and so now I've seen it, and now I can um, say how much I think that it was one of the most not only anti men, not only anti woman movie I've ever seen, but just plainly one of the most anti-human movies I've ever seen. Um, the opening scene, which I'm sure even people who haven't seen it know about, um, it's taking a page from 2001: Space Odyssey, where the apes discover something and they start learning how to use tools and they start evolving. Um, the opening scene of Barbie is little girls discovering Barbie and then abandoning little baby dolls. Um, but they're not just abandoning them; they are smashing them and destroying all baby dolls in sight. And for me, I'm looking at this and I can only think of abortion. Like this is a artistic portrayal of abortion. These are little girls seeing a new ideal that's being presented because there's literally a giant uh, that's supposed to be a doll, giant Margot Robbie as Barbie standing, looming above all these little girls, and they looking up to the new age, the new ideal of what a woman should be, and they are no longer happy or satisfied with the dolls in their hands, and so they must kill them, they must destroy them. Um, And, that's kind of the Barbie movie in miniature, I think, right there in the opening scene. Um, And right there, you have a very what was the word? Destructive message right there. Um, because it's the new ideal that's being held up, and the one that the movie is saying is great for women is not a good ideal, because it's an ideal that has been, which is surprising because it's already been criticized so much. It's upholding a perfectly shaped, perfect figure, white, blonde woman, and saying you have to be this to be in order to be happy and to be pretty. And the fulfillment that you can find from having a child and from having a family and having relationships, is not real. And this is my main takeaway from the movie was that, um, true fulfillment and true actualization only comes from yourself. It only comes from, um, you existing as an island in a sea of other islands. Um, because the through line throughout the entire movie, which I don't think is ungenerous to say at all, is that men and women need to exist separately, and they cannot exist in relationship with each other. And that there is another extremely destructive idea to both men and women and all of society, because we need relationship in order to function and to continue, and also to be self-actualized ourselves. Without any sense of community, society starts breaking down. Like we saw it in 2020 with the lockdowns. Suicide rates go through the roof. But why would they do that if we were just sufficient with ourselves? We were extremely unhappy when we couldn't see our friends, couldn't see our family. And then, of course, just the idea that men and women you know, cannot work together. That is something that's just pushed throughout the entire movie, and that's, you were hoping it almost at times it seems like it's setting itself up for a discovery at the end. Like, actually, if we work together, then we're going to be better. But no, that doesn't have that ending. Um, and so I think that, um, you can try to read the movie through different ways. Um, but it's definitely not being ungenerous to say that it's pushing destructive messages that are really bad for and hurtful for people, which is worrisome because obviously lots of young people went to go see it, who are going to be unconsciously absorbing these ideas. And some people might say, like, hey, you're reading too much into it. It's just supposed to be a funny comedy movie. It's Well, for one thing, it wasn't funny, but for another, it it's not. Obviously, the creators of it did not mean it to be just a funny comedy movie, because they have like 10-minute long speeches randomly scattered throughout the movie. A
Well,
movie
also,
that's not trying to make a point is not going to do that.
right, and they purposefully marketed it for younger audiences, not for it's it wasn't marketed just so that it was a highbrow comedy. It was marketed so that it was for everyone, especially younger people, younger girls. So
Mhm.
that doesn't hold water at all. So I just see now that there's a long reply to my reply where we went over some of the things. We'll just jump through. We can't go through all of this. I think analysis of a film criticizing the concept of patriarchy is only useful. So I disagreed with his definition of of the patriarchy. And he says, I think analysis of a film criticizing the concept of patriarchy is only useful if the filmmaker and viewer are working in the same use of the world. Disagree. Why? Why would it be? Let's see.
Wait, can you say again what he said there? I didn't hear what he said.
I think analysis of a film criticizing the concept of patriarchy is only useful if the filmmaker and viewer are working with the same use of the word. So he's saying that the filmmakers and us have to agree on what patriarchy is. Um, I disagree with that fundamentally. If I am watching, we talked last time about the propagandic piece, the propagandistic work of the Nazi director um, Leni Riefenstahl, and she would define the Jewish race as parasites. So if I'm going to critique her work, do I have to also define the Jewish race that way? You don't see why. That doesn't make any sense at all. So that seems
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous on its face. Um, we're trying to. There's many sentences. Let me just jump to the end here. Motivation of porn. Okay, so I pointed out that it doesn't matter if, for example, porn producers produce. So he made the argument that why would someone produce something that's destructive? No one would do that. And I pointed out, well, there's plenty of porn producers out there that produce things that are destructive. Um, so it doesn't seem to follow that you say that just because someone wouldn't want to do something destructive, then they wouldn't do it. It's a very naive statement. Um, the motivation of porn producers is easily explained. Demand is high. Capitalistic system. Okay, anti-capitalistic. Um, People will exploit it for profit. Okay, so he's actually describing why someone would create something like the Barbie movie because it's profitable. They don't make it because it's harmful, because it's profitable. They don't make it to push a message, they make it for money. A movie with a message you're suggesting the Barbie movie has can't be explained by profit motive. It would have just been as profitable without it. That's a great point. That's something that we would happily agree upon, is that you didn't need to put this into the Barbie movie. You could have done all of this without this message. In fact, the producers got the outcome you think that they want that could potentially hurt the movie's profits. There are so many filmmakers hurting, like look at Disney. There are so many filmmakers that are movie studios that are hurting their profits because they're pushing a message that they believe in. Principles of a Profit is actually playing right now in our capitalistic society. Um, what exactly do you think motivated the producers of the Barbie movie? Um, so the producers of the Barbie movie, we don't know exactly their motivations, and I don't think that they know exactly their motivations. Something that is um, very common among artists is a lack of analyzing your motivation for doing something, beyond saying, "Oh, I want to do something. I want to do something good." I think something that's really nice to point out here is the that comedian who is always keeping hate on Ben Shapiro. It's a feminist icon who says, she wakes up, she does some drugs, and then she drinks some wine, and she's like the happiest person she knows, without realizing that um, if you are if you didn't have to do drugs and drink alcohol all the time when you wake up, you probably, if you have to do that in order to be happy, you might not be the happiest person you know. You're definitely not the happiest person I know. I can think of one or two people happier than you. Um, so, however, that's the if someone lives a certain lifestyle, it seems like you are duty bound to prove that that lifestyle is worth living. Like you kind of have to, because you need to justify you living that lifestyle. So it's not something you even think about so much as like, well, that you're almost convincing yourself. Um, Artists can be quite capable of living something that's destructive and then pushing that self-destructive tendencies. We all have some, pushing those self-destructive tendencies into the work that they do. I've heard it said that a piece that attempts to be artistic is often something that describes the interior state of the artist. And so if you're describing a miserable interior state, or you're in a miserable interior state, a lot of what you create is going to take on those characteristics. Um, so I think you can have motivations that you attempting to be truthful do and be self-deceived. Something Jordan Peterson talks a lot about is you can lie so much to yourself that you don't realize anymore that you're lying to yourself. So just because we wish to prescribe the best, it all boils down to just because we wish to prescribe the best motivations in something, if we see messages that are destructive, like you just pointed out so well, we need to point them out. And you can't just explain them away because you say, well, this is something, why would someone want to do something destructive? A lot of people do things that are destructive.
Hmm.
Um, I think we need to move on from that other guy, but thank you for all the comments. Wanted to get to one more before we close. From Nathaniel Jamie Donahue, 1892. I think the real question is, what is love? Smiley face. Whew, that's a tough one there. I don't know why. I'm wondering, why is it that that's the question? Because we're talking about art. Why do we have to define love? Do you get a little bit more? Do you see more about the question though? Maybe I'm just taking it too much at face value.
I mean, it's a big question. It's a question that art is definitely um, oftentimes delves into and explores. Um, I think it's an important question for society for sure. Um, but it's not something that obviously can be easily sat down and discussed in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
Um, but I think that it's a real question and it's a good one. I can't really say why he wants it answered, but I don't know why you would want me to answer that.
Well, I mean, in the 2 second answer is that God is love, right? Where you that which has created all of us is that which and that which we're headed to and which our life, our journey here on earth is a quest to get to that point, is love. Um, Now, if we're going to describe it in a more human sense or in a less supernatural sense, it's way more difficult. Um, because it is love exists only if you can't prove it. The moment that you prove it, it's it disappears because love is kind of a leap of faith at all times. So the more that you try to pin it down, the less that you have it. Um, I think maybe I want to read into why the question is it probably is tied up with beauty. It probably is something that you're seeing when artists are. I think one of the characteristics we read upon ultimately, especially as a Catholic artist, is to pursue that which is beautiful. So if you wish to pursue something that is beautiful, love is tied up intrinsically in this, um, because it really is, when it comes down to it, hard to make anything beautiful, objectively beautiful, if you don't have the pursuit of love, the aims of love, the goal of love, ultimately in your sights. Um, so maybe that's why it ties into it. And I don't think that this is a where this question is going to be answered in the few remaining seconds we have. But hopefully that gives at least something for Nathaniel and Jamie. Do you have further thoughts though?
No, I appreciate the question. I think it's an important one. As artists, it's like you said, it's something that we need to be aiming towards
Right.
because that's part of it's part of beauty. It's tied into that. It's tied into truth. It's tied into beauty, and ultimately, of course, it's tied into God.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think that's our mailbag. We have a lot of other things that we could get to, but unfortunately, it's way past. I thought this would be a 30-minute mailbag jaunt. Instead, it turned out to be an hour, and we better get to our respective duties and obligations. But I hope you all enjoyed this. And Peter, any last thoughts for our audience?
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna put in the link for the Socrates, so check that out. But even if we disagree with your comments, keep on commenting. We love to hear these thoughts. It
Yeah.
gets us thinking, it gets us understanding what other people are thinking, and it's great to have your views challenged. I think it's super awesome because either you realize you're wrong and you come to the correct opinion, or you are have by thinking it through or have your own opinion strengthened. So um, keep on challenging us, even if you disagree. We want to hear from you.
Yeah. YouTube's a good place for that. For people that disagree with you. Anyway, thanks, Pete. Thank you all. We'll see you all next time.